Today is Monday, November the 26th, 2007, and we're interviewing John Aclin at his home. Mr. Aclin is, how many years old are you?
Let's see, I'm going to be 78.
79.
Going on...
You're going on 80.
All right, I'm going on 80. When you get that old, you lose track of them.
Mr. Aclin is 79 years old, having been born on January the 8th, 1928. And my name is Dawn Burkett, and I will be conducting the interview today. And Crystal Booz is doing the video recording for the interview today. We're, as I said, in Mr. Aclin's home in Quincy, Pennsylvania. And could you state for the recording what branch of the service you served in?
United States Navy as a regular.
And what was your highest rank?
Seaman First Class.
And when did you serve?
From March, I believe it was, 1946 until New Year's Eve on 1947. I did not serve a full term because President Truman at the end of the war said that men who had wartime points could leave the Navy early if they desired. And since my ship was going to be making I think it was our 7th cruise into an area I did not particularly want to go to again, I decided I'd leave the Navy instead. So I left.
Okay. So, Mr. Aclin, I'm just going to ask you a real general question, but what can you tell me about your wartime experience?
As a young boy, it was wonderful. I ended up on a ship which never entered any hostile areas. It was a vessel which carried frozen food. It was the largest ship of its type in the Navy. It was called the U.S.S. Hyades AF-28. We had 3 cargo holds up forward which carried frozen food, and 2 cargo holds aft which carried what they call dry stores, all food. The only unpleasant part about the journeys were on return trips we very frequently took back dead bodies for interment in the United States. The vessel made, I guess I made 7 or 8 cruises back and forth across the Pacific. I served all my time really after the shooting started. So I got to visit China, Japan, the Philippines, the Marshalls, the Gilberts, the Marianas. Some highlights that most people would never have experienced. I got to see 2 atom bombs go off. I was at Bikini when they fired them both. As a volunteer, we didn't even know we were there at Bikini until after the fact. There's a famous quote made by Walter Winchell where he said that all these brave volunteers at Bikini would be either dead, buried, sterile, or bald within 3 years. Well, he was off on 3 counts. This is all mine, I'm telling you, and I have 4 children, so he missed. But then again, nobody knew anything about atomic weapons, and remember those were the 4th and 5th weapons that were fired. The first one, of course, was in Arizona. The other 2, the 2nd and 3rd, were in Japan, and I got to see those sites. We knew so little about atomic energy and its fallout that we drank the water out of the lagoons because we were a ship, you know, you desalinate, and we were radioactive as a result. And as a result, we had to, when we left the lagoon after they fired the 2nd one, we had to sail around in circles out for a little while before they let us go into San Francisco, spraying salt water on us so that we could get rid of some of the radioactivity. I had some very interesting things happen when I was in the Navy. Interesting in the sense that, for example, in Shanghai, we were swinging at anchor. I don't know if anybody other than a Navy man will know what I'm talking about, but we had the bow tied up to a buoy out in the middle of the Yangtze, and we were swinging from our starboard to port to line up with the second buoy behind us so that we could put the line in and be tied up fore and aft in the middle of the river. And at about the same time that we were swinging, coming towards the port, a Chinese vessel came between us and the buoy, and our stern, which had a very pronounced hangout above the water, hit the vessel as it sailed to our starboard side, and we raked the whole ferry boat. There must have been about 300 people on that thing, because at least 100 of them ended up in the water. The vessel almost sunk, and they put a hole in our stern about the size of that back wall that I'm looking at now. And that piece of metal, which was the back of the ship, actually formed a scoop and scooped people, pieces, hunks of the vessel into our after quarter. Since my duty section at that moment happened to be right there at the stern, because I was ready to handle the lines to tie us up to that second buoy, I ran down below deck, opened the door as we were still swinging and scoping, and closed it real quick to the hatch to the after compartment. When we finished scooping, it was our job to clean up that mess. Pieces, hunks of people, and debris, which we did. And we had a hole in our stern, which had to be about 20 feet square. So we then patched it up as best we could and sailed to Guam, where the Navy put a steel patch on it. I had some very interesting things happen in the Navy. That was one. Another time, we were a very, very proud ship. We used to go into a harbor called the Lungapu, and you'd sail in, and we'd dock at a dock which came out of to the deep water, which was a U-shaped dock. Pier, I guess you could call it, and we'd tie up alongside of it. And our skipper used to love to come in at full speed, swing down, drop the anchor, and just gently hit the dock. So we had a new pilot on board who decided to try the same thing and proceeded to go right through the middle of it. And I got pictures of our ship right through the middle of the dock, up the bow up on the shore, and this poor colonel jumping up and down screaming that we had destroyed the lifeline to northern Luzon as the rest of the dock floated out into the middle of the Lungapu Bay. We had very interesting times aboard our ship. That was an interesting one. As I say, I went to Bikini. We got to see that, and we had an interesting time. We watched as we tied up alongside of a submarine, and it swung at harbor, and one side it was all melted. That was from the blast, and then we found out what we were doing there. And the second time we went in, we tied up where the Prince Eugene had sat, and that had gone because it sunk on the second blast. So it was an interesting place to be. As I say, we were all radioactive, and for years after that, I used to go regularly to the VA hospital to be checked because, as I said, they had no idea what was going to happen to the men who were exposed to the radiation back in those days. And it was rather interesting. Interesting little footnote as a result of that sojourn. I have 4 children. I have 2 boys and 2 girls. Well, 2 girls and 2 boys. Actually, a girl, a boy, a boy, in that order. I was coming up an escalator in Penn Station, New York. I was going down an escalator, rather, and I saw a gentleman coming up the escalator who happened to be on my ship. So we got together and talked. And lo and behold, he lived in a building called 190 Nagle Avenue. I lived in a building 190 Nagle Avenue. I lived in apartment 6G. He lived in apartment 14G. We'd never seen each other, and we lived there for 3 years. So we got together. And we got to talking, and so has children, so and so doesn't. And as we're talking, I'm hearing this, and I'm a chemist, so as a scientist, I suddenly dawned on me, everybody we talked about had girls. Now, if you know anything, and you two do, the percentage of births are that you have more boys than girls, especially after a war. And this is not normal. So I went to the VA and I said, we called up like 6 or 7 fellas, and every one of them who was at Bikini and was radioactive had a girl. And at that time we were blasting off in the atmosphere, and the radioactivity was starting to increase, and they were starting to talk about maybe, that was dangerous, but we really didn't know. And as I told the doctor, I said, Doc, if what we're talking about is real, and it scared the daylights out of me, because it sounded awful real, you're talking about one generation, and that's the end of it. No more people, because if you don't have any boys, you don't have any reproduction, not that I know of. So, long story short, my first child was a girl. But after a couple of years after that point, I went to the VA, as I did every 6 months, and the doctor says, a boy. They started appearing, and my second child was a boy. And after that, we sort of hit the normal balance. But I wonder if the radioactivity we were exposed to did something genetically for a period of time until it wore off or something. The half-life was extinguished, and we started coming back to normal reproductive cycles. But it frightened the daylights out of me for a long period of time when you suddenly stop and think about it. Every single fella who was exposed, the first child was a girl. And several of them all were girls.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that really scares you when you stop and think about it, because we could extinguish the human race very quickly. Radiation has a long lifespan, and we put more and more of it out every year. We haven't done it in a long while because we no longer need to blow them up to find out what happens. But for a long period of time there, it scared the daylights out of me as a scientist. I really wondered what was going to happen. Well, I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, I got a million anecdotes of things that we did, crazy things that happened to us in the service. My ship was a good ship. Crazy in the sense that we had all sorts of unusual accidents. I told you we went through a dock. We got smashed in the stern. We ended up ashore once. We went through a tidal wave. We were in Guam, and they announced that this tidal wave was coming. So we sailed out. Now there was a Liberty ship tied up right alongside of us that did not sail for some reason or other. I guess they didn't have enough sense to leave. We came back in. Now you got to know about the harbor in Guam. You have a beach and a cliff that goes up about 100 feet, and there was an airport at the top of the cliff. When we came back in, they had been building a breakwater, so they had take these big rocks and dropping them in the water, and they had finished about maybe 400 feet of it. We came back in, the breakwater was gone. The Liberty ship, or Victory ship, whichever it was, and I can't remember now, was now sitting on the shore up against the cliff face, and all the planes that had been left on the top of the plateau were smashed because the wave, 100 feet of it, was higher than the shore when it hit the shore, and it washed right across the top of the airport and pushed that vessel onto the shore up against the cliff edge where it's at because nobody could figure out how to get it out of there. And of course the dock and everything that we'd been at before was no longer around because it was now toothpicks. So that was an interesting one. First time I'd ever seen it. When you go out to sea, there are some beautiful things. I can remember one night we were sailing into Busan towards Korea. We never actually got in there because that's a mud flat. But we were going to Tacuba, which is in northern China. Tsingtao, actually, in that area. And we were sailing in, and the water, because of the sun, and turned purple. It was the most beautiful sight you ever want to see. And you know, you get out at sea at night and you're sailing along, and the plankton and sea life sparkles at night, just like little stars in the water. And it's absolutely beautiful to watch as you sail along and you get this turbulence behind the stern. And of course, since my after station was the stern of the ship, I got to see a lot of it. And just beautiful to watch. The grandeur of the ocean, the fact that it's so open, so large. Interesting things about sailing a vessel in the middle of the ocean where there are no islands and no land around. We got painted one time, and so the paint was drying on the ship, and it was started to rain. Have you ever seen a ship sailing zigzag to avoid rain clouds, which is what can happen out at sea? And we sailed the most erratic course because the captain didn't want the rain to get on the deck of the freshly painted ship, because it would have washed a lot of that paint away. So we sailed around rain clouds in the Pacific Ocean to avoid getting wet. As I say, interesting little anecdote, but we did it, and it was fun. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, there's a million things that we did and the fun that we had.
Christmas in Japan.
Huh?
Christmas in Japan.
Oh, okay. One of the most beautiful sights I ever had was 1946. Was over a year. Japan at this time, I think we were no longer considering it a hostile country. The first couple of trips there, you went armed because it was still considered an enemy. But after that, and at that night, we sailed in, and we had one of the aircraft carriers, I can't remember which one, flying the largest American flag I've ever seen. I'll bet that thing had to be a size of a football field. And every light from every vessel around it was shining on it. And there you are, leaving our ship in a small boat to go to Christmas Eve service. And this gigantic American flag flying.
Sounds beautiful.
It was moving. Never forget it. A lot of guys died to put it there.
Would you like a minute?
Yeah.
I knew that was special.
I can see it's very special. Did you bring pictures back of that? No?
It was middle of the night.
Probably wouldn't have shown up for a while, I guess.
It was the most awesome sight I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to see Japan and Tokyo right after we landed. I saw what the atom bombs had done.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to see it on land and I got to see it out at sea.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you this, am I glad we never had a war where we had to use another one.
Mm-hmm.
It's a horror. Ships melted in the blast. And there was a famous image from, I can't remember now whether it was Hiroshima or Nagasaki, of an image of a person who melted into a stone surface, one of the few walls that was still standing. What they figured happened is when the blast went off, that person vaporized, but acted as a block against the brick wall so that his image showed up because the rest of it was blasted and that was not. So you got this picture of a person up against a fragment of a wall and everything else is gone. And that, to me, epitomized what that war could do, what that blast could do. Now, I'm a scientist, and I've seen a lot of crazy things go on, but those weapons are so devastating, so horrible, that I hope they never had to be used again. And I'll put those, as far as I'm concerned, they got to be a lot worse than gas or biological warfare, because you got a chance with those. But when an atom bomb goes off, when a nuclear weapon of any type goes off, there's no chance at all. There's no hiding from it. You got to be deeply buried to survive. And I don't like the aftermath of it. As I said, just exposure to radiation scared the daylights out of us for many years after the war. Because, what the heck, when was our first child born? 52? 53. That's a long time after that. And I remember we were talking about, as far as we were concerned, it was all girls at that time. And I don't think it was maybe 54 or 55 before the first boy from the guys who were exposed was born. And that was 10 years later.
Now, how old were you when you enlisted?
I was 17 when I enlisted. The Navy sent me to very, very funny. That's another story. I enlisted at 17. They did not accept me. They sent me to school. They told me to go and take hematology, urinology, and bacteriology, which I did, and topography. You recognize what those four are for? I was going to be a medic. Navy medics' life expectancy was 30 seconds on the beach.
Wow.
Yeah, they were the guys who got picked up. The Japanese had a nice habit. Wound a man, and then 4 guys would run over to pick him up. Now he got 4 more targets. And the Red Cross made a beautiful target because you carried no weapons.
So what happened? You weren't a medic.
Nope, I was not a medic. I took the courses. I enlisted as a medic. I was going to go to California. I got on a troop train. And I was leading man because I had a rating. So we get to California. They hand me a 72-hour pass and say, come back Monday. And you go to report to Alameda, which was the hospital I was going to go to. I come back Monday morning at 5 o'clock. And they said, John, you're taking out a group of men to a ship. And I said, but I got to report to the hospital. They said, well, you can do that afterward. Right now you're going to, you got to find the AF-28. So I went into the office and I said, what's an AF? And the guy looks at me and says, I don't know. So he looked it up in a book and he says, well, AFT are tugs. I said, there's 126 guys out there I'm going to take to a tug? I don't know. So anyway, we get out to a place called Hunters Point. Now, Hunters Point is a Navy repair yard. All right, so we get on, they tell me go to dock so-and-so, and I get the 2 busloads of men to a dock. All right, walk out, the end there are a bunch of little tugboats. All right, maybe they're going to replace all of the guys on the tugboats. So there's a guy walking up and down with a rifle, and I said, I'm looking for something called the AF-28. And he says, you're at it. And I said, where? What are you talking about? He says, that. And I look, and there's this monstrous ship sitting in dry dock. And I look down, 5 stories down, couple stories up. What is that thing? 600 and some odd feet of ship, as big as an aircraft carrier back in those days. What is it? That's the AF-28. What's the AF-28? That's it. It's a freezer ship. So I walk aboard, salute the officer of the deck and say, I've got a contingent of men that are supposed to report on board. He looks at it and says, great. He says, where's the seaman, the bosun's mate? And I said, there's no bosun's mate. I'm the only rating. He says, uh-oh. So he picks up the phone, calls somebody. Down comes a 2.5 striper, lieutenant commander, executive officer, and he says, you got the contingent? Yes. He says, where's our bosun's mate? No bosun's mate. Me. He says, oh. So he goes away, comes back a few minutes, says, get the men aboard. All the men come aboard. He says, wait here. Wait here. I mean, he's got 2 stripes and I don't have anything, so I got to wait here. He says, take that rating badge off. What? He says, you're it. He says, you report to the 2nd Division. Oh? He says, we're leaving now. And gangplank comes up, they fill the dry dock, the ship floats, and off we go. And a couple of years later, I come back to land. Never made the hospital. They needed it, they were going out, they were a man short, I was there, and warm bodies in the Navy get plugged into wherever a hole is required, so I spent the rest of the time in the Navy. And I knew more about the medical profession than our medics aboard ship. But I had a good time. I enjoyed it. It was a wonderful experience. Mistake, but a wonderful experience.
Was it really a mistake?
Sure it was.
Just
I was
because you
supposed to be in the hospital.
Okay, so mistake meaning you were supposed to report to the hospital.
Mm-hmm. The problem was that they had no rated men
Right.
available at TI, which is Treasure Island, by the way. It's a flat spot in the middle of San Francisco Harbor. The World's Fair had been kept there, and YBI was Marines and TI was Navy. So, and of course they have perfect control because you can't swim ashore. The sharks sort of ate anybody who went swimming too much in that water. And the only way out was to get onto the bridge, which spans and has an elevator going up and down, and the Marines guarded that. So you did not go ashore unless you had liberty, and you went by boat, because there was no way to get up on the bridge, really. Effectively, you can't hitchhike on that. They frowned upon it. So we had, it was an interesting time. I was supposed to report on Monday to the Navy hospital, and instead I reported on the ship. And I never got back ashore until I actually got my discharge at the same base that I was supposed to serve on.
Ironic.
Ironic. It was strange, but it happened. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, I got a million anecdotes about crazy things that happened. What else are you going to bring up?
What about, can you just go into your day-to-day living on the boat? What did you do in the morning? Where did you sleep? That kind of stuff.
We slept. The ship was designed to hold more men than we actually had, especially at the end of the war. When the actual shooting stopped, a lot of the men left. Like I did at the very end when they told us we were going back up to Alaska, and I decided I didn't want to go, so I took an early discharge. But we slept in bunks. There were iron racks with the mattress about maybe 4 inches thick, and they were 4 high. And if you were the unlucky guy to be in the bottom one, you sort of had about that much room between you and the deck. But I slept in a hammock whenever I could, which was usually all the time. I slept in number 3 gun tub, which was a 5-inch 38, and I'd hook one end in the trunnion in the muzzle of the ship and the other one on the where the controls were. And I slept slung underneath the gun. That way, if they rang general quarters, all I would do was bounce, and I was standing there. The only problem is I used to like to sleep there when we were in port too, because the hammock was much more comfortable when you're in the South Pacific than sleeping on below decks, where it could be 130 in the shade. And the guys used to love it because I slept very soundly, and I'd wake up and I'd look down first because I'd be hanging out over the side of the ship. They'd traverse the gun out, and of course, I'm out on, yep, 40 feet above the water. Of course, you only did that when you were not moving.
So they like to give you a hard time, is that what you're saying?
Well, yes. See, is being what I was responsible for is a normal day. Is at 6 o'clock, they'd wake you up. You would then immediately have a call called sweepers man your brooms, and you'd sweep the deck. Now, it's a steel deck. You're in the middle of the ocean. There's nothing on it, but you sweep it anyway. Which meant you turned the hoses on and washed everything with water. And then you ran around with a broom pushing the water around into the scuppers. And that was it. So you did that for about 20 minutes. Then you got shaved and showered, and you went down below and ate breakfast. Now, breakfast was a very interesting thing. You had 2 ladders, and technically you're supposed to come in on the starboard side and leave by port. Don't ask me why, but that was the way the line was set up. So you'd come down the ladder and you'd go through the chow line and you'd grab your food and sit down. And if you're out at sea, you know, that's always a pleasant thing to do because the ship's doing this and everything's fixed, and you hold on to your plate because otherwise you'd be eating his soup and his salad as it came by your dinner plate, because they did not have what they have in some of the smaller ships. They had battens put across, so your tin plate went in between your tin tray, and it wouldn't slide far because it only got that, and of course everything got slopped over. And if you were in deep water and you had 15 or 20 foot swells, which were pretty normal out there, you know, things like coffee would now be in with your cereal or whatever. It was very interesting to eat. So you learn to eat very quickly. In fact, my wife says I've never forgotten how.
He still does that.
Yes, you do. Because you wanted to get it before it was all
Right.
A stew, regardless of what it started out as. That's what it ended up as. It was very, very interesting the way we ate. Being who I was, and my name being A, as I think I mentioned earlier, when you're getting your shots, the first guy to get it has to, you just relieve the watch so that they can come and get theirs. And being that I was the first man on board the ship to get a shot, I always had to relieve the furthermost outlook, which is always a guy in the crow's nest. So you get your shots, 3, 4, 5, whatever number it is, so your arms feel like lead, and you run up. Now you're running up to the forward end of the ship because the crow's nest sits between holes number 2 and 3. It sits on a small island, and on the outside of the island there were 4 40 millimeter cannons, rapid fire, and then you crawl up about 80, 90 feet up in the air, and you go through this little hole, and you go up to the next, and you're up the highest point on the ship. And you knock on the side of the thing, and you crawl around the outside of it because the guy's standing on the hole that he's got to get out of. So he lifts the hole up, and he goes down, you come in through the top. Now you're maybe 97, 100 feet up in the air, and the ship's doing this as you're moving around, and you're crawling around the outside of a steel shell, which is about the size of a small barrel, to get into the top, and there are no handholds on that, because normally you go right through the bottom and go out through the top to go up higher. And now your arms are leaden because you've just been shot full of all sorts of nice little toxins and antibodies of all types. and you swing up. Of course, being half orangutan at that time as a young man, you're able to do it. You're still able. I couldn't do it on my life, depend upon it now. And you'd get up there on top and sit on top of the crow's nest until he got out, and then you'd slip into it. Then you reverse the order when you get back. Because he'd come up through the middle, and I'd go out through the outside. I always did that because whoever was in that, when they came up, they'd be grumbling and moaning and groaning because they had to spend another 2 or 3 hours up there when I had to go back down below and put my feet on solid steel. No round, just steel, because that's what the plates were made out of. Our ship was all steel. We had no wooden decks or anything like that. That went out long before we got on board ship. It was an interesting time, but my job was always to lead the furthest most, and that was the guy in the crow's nest. And I hated it. But I did it. Anything else you want to ask me?
Of course. What would you do with this food? You said there were the ship was full
Our
of
ship,
food.
yes, we carried frozen food in the forward decks and dry stores in the after deck. I was in charge of number 4 hold. That's dry stores. And the forward ship, as I say, we were a couple hundred guys aboard ship, and we'd sail. Now, when we landed in a port and were feeding, it was easy. You'd rig the booms out, and you'd pick cargo up, put them in a net, drop them on shore. When you met a fleet, things were not so easy. Now you'd have an aircraft carrier here, and a destroyer on this side, and you're feeding both. Now, aircraft carrier, 3,000. Destroyer, 250 men. Our ship, feeding 2 ships at one time, out of 3 or 4 holes at one time. 100 and some odd men. We worked our tail off. They put 100 guys on a line. We only had 100 guys to handle 4 or 5 lines, which meant we had maybe 10 guys to a line. That meant every man on the ship was handling cargo at that time when we did it out at sea. And they'd pull on the line, and you'd have to run like crazy to keep up with them because they had all the manpower in the world, and we didn't. And now remember, you got 2 ships sailing along, and they're doing this as well as this. So you got this going on. And
plus
you got
around
lines
rain clouds.
between them, all right? And so when the ships do that, you got to let line out. When the ships do this, you got to let line in, while cargo's moving across on those lines. Interesting. You got to be adept at it because you had to, because the worst thing in the world is to have that cargo hit the water. Then all blazes occurs because you lose it. And those guys on that ship needed it. We did that 3 times out there, feeding the fleet like that. It's the most exhausting thing in the world. I think the only time I was tireder than that was when we evacuated some people from Tsingtao in the up in northern China. The communists and the nationalists were fighting. This was, I guess, 46. And they were shelling each other. And they called a ceasefire to allow a train to come down to the harbor. Civilians, refugees, who were being evacuated. So, well, they were shelling across the ship. Took the people, got them out, and you do all of this while you're working like crazy to make space. We went through a minefield to get there. Rushed like crazy. I can remember that because we had a detonator mine that was floating alongside of us. And you do that by getting a guy with a rifle to shoot at it and try to hit the detonator on it before it hits the side of the ship. And this thing's coming along, you know, and they're banging away at it. And they finally hit it with a machine gun because the guy with the rifle couldn't get it. So they mounted a .50 caliber, and that thing went off, and we sailed right past it. But I can remember working cargo, unloading cargo. I don't remember who we were doing it for, but we were taking stuff out and dropping it as fast as we could. And we were doing that for about 10 hours. And the executive officer came by and told me to sack out. So I laid down on the deck, went to sleep while they continued working cargo. Got about an hour and a half sleep, was shaken awake, told to report to the bridge, and I had to steer us out of the harbor. I took the helm, and we steered. And you're steering through a minefield, and I kid you not, that was the hardest ship to steer in the world at that time. Man, I was never so tired in all my life. But we got out, we got to Sasebo, unloaded what we had to unload, and then we sailed again. But I had about an hour and a half sleep in 72, and when they told me finally I could slack out, I don't think I woke up for 20 hours. I slept right through. That was the hardest thing I ever did, was to wake up after an hour's sleep after working cargo for something like 16, 18 hours. I was tired. But you get tired after a while, and you know, when you're young and you're stupid and you're foolish, you think you can do anything. We did. That's the most amazing thing, is we were able to do it. Wouldn't want to tackle it now. What else have you got to ask me?
Could you tell me in what ways your spiritual life or your cultural beliefs were influenced by the war?
Yeah.
Either while you were there, when you came home?
Very much so.
Okay, can you tell me about that?
Well, I've got an interesting tale there.
Okay.
I went into the Navy as a Roman Catholic. I came out of the Navy as I wouldn't say an atheist, as an agnostic. I still believed that there was a God, but I didn't think he had anything to do with mankind.
Why is that?
Well, the things I saw, the things we did, you know, before that, you were always told, you know, God is good, God is kind. And I said, God can't be good and God can't be kind. And, you know, I'm more of the Old Testament, because the things that happened in that war were not good, they were not kind, they were not nice. And I just didn't believe anymore. Well, I met this young girl, and she's a very religious woman. And when I came out of the service, I went to our priest, and I told him, you know, I lost my faith. I just can't believe anymore a God of kindness and goodness after the things we saw and did in the name of our God and our religion and our people and our beliefs. And I got the round robin that I'd gotten before, you know, if you have faith, you'll believe, and if you believe, you'll have faith, that type of thing. And I went to church with her because she wanted to go to church, and I wanted to be with her, so I went. And I asked her minister, and he gave me the first answer that made some sense to me. He said, nobody can give you faith. Nobody can give you a belief. You've got to find it for yourself. If you study, if you hunt for it, you'll find it. Well, I hunted and I found it. I have a very firm belief. I do believe that man is good, basically. Man can be bad, basically. The same man, because it's the same side of the coin. Right and wrong are very, very close. A thin line between the two. Good and evil are separated by the thinnest of line, because so much was done in the name of good that was evil, and so much of good turned out evil, and vice versa. It's a very, very indistinguishable barrier between the two. And all you can do is have faith that what you're doing will be right, and pray that it is. because sometimes we do things for the right reason that turn out wrong, and sometimes we've done things for the wrong reason which have turned out right. And I wonder at times if we know the difference, because it's hard. So I've tried for many years never to do a harm to anyone else, and to do the best I can, because that's all you can do. You can't undo a wrong, but you can certainly undo rights. There are too many things that we've done that I wish we had never done. And there's too much that I haven't done that I should have. And that's it.
It sounds like something that's very close to your heart.
Mm-hmm.
Very close to your heart.
I've done the best I can, but it ain't good enough. Excuse me.
Would you like a few minutes?
No, I'll go on.
So,
Ask away. I'm back.
whatever you need. So I guess you did talk a little bit about how it's impacted your life today.
Oh yeah.
And it sounds like it's huge. It's a huge impact on your
Very
life today.
much. I watch people die, and you never forget it. I would not want to go through it again, but I wouldn't give a penny not to go through it a second time, but I wouldn't give you $1 million to take away the memories.
Now, why would you say that? Can you tell me about that?
Because it has given me the ability to face the future.
Okay.
You know, everybody has a past.
That's true.
Most of us never learn from what happened in the past. You know, we just keep right on going to the future. And I think the things that I've gone through, and you know, my wife can attest to this, it's not been easy. Our life, I identify myself after I graduate from college as a professional nomad. We have moved frequently, taken other jobs, but I've learned one thing. You do the best you can under the circumstances that are facing you. You face the future with an open heart and the sure knowledge that you're not alone, and you can face anything. It's the hardest lesson to learn, that you got support, there's an awful lot of love out there, and all you got to do is ask, and you get help. Most of us don't know how to ask for help.
It's true.
You want to do it all yourself, and you can't. You've got to be willing to accept the aid that's there. And when you do, you get it.
Now, how long were you back before you met your wife?
Not too long.
4 months.
4
4
months?
months. Did you have family
Oh,
when
yeah.
you came back? Were they a support to you when you came back before you met your wife? During that initial adjustment back?
It's a different period of time. Remember, we had 17 million men coming back. Every one of them was different. Every man had a different story. Every man had a different trial that he had to face.
Mm-hmm.
The transition from military to civilian life was more than just taking off a uniform and putting on a pair of civilian clothes. You had experiences that you had to blot out or to remember, depending upon what they were. You had to change the way you lived from what you were doing when you were in the military to what you were going to be doing as a civilian. A lot of men haven't had the ability to make that transition. That's why we have some of the problems we have today. I go to the VA hospital on a regular basis. And you look at some of the boys that are coming back now, and they got real problems because that transition is hard. It's not easy to go from where you were to what you have here in civilian life. It was easier for us because there were so many of us. When you talk about 17 million, you stop to think about it. And, you know, like myself, I came back. I wanted to go to school. I had a girl who was not my wife at the time. And there were, you know, to make the transition from being in the service to being civilian was very difficult, believe it or not. There's a degree of freedom as a civilian that you don't have in the military. And that's a hard adjustment to accept. You know, in the military you get up at a certain time, you do things at a certain time, you've got certain rules and regulations that control you, and suddenly they're all gone. And the hardest thing to do is to accept the fact that now you're on your own again. And a lot of men don't make that transition very easily. And it was tough. I was very fortunate. My family they hadn't moved or anything while I was away. I wasn't away that long, a couple of years. I grew a lot, and I guess I was a lot more mature than I was when I went away. You know, you came back, and I was going to go to college, and I was going to spend 4 years doing that. And when I met Ann, I decided, you know what? I wasn't going to wait 4 years to get married, so we got married in my first year of college, first 6 months of college. And the happiest 3.5 years I had was going through school, because there were no restrictions on us. We were married, we had an apartment. She worked to support me in a style I wish I could get accustomed to. And it was wonderful. We were the chaperones for the other young couples in the college group that I hung around with, who their families realized that my wife and I were mature enough, and, you know, being a married couple, we weren't going to let anything happen to the other kids. So all the parties and all the New Year's Eves were at our home. And we had a lot of friends, and made the transition a lot easier than it would have been otherwise.
Sounds like you were very fortunate.
Oh yeah. Fortunate in the mate I picked, and the life we've led. We have 4 wonderful kids. As my wife, as I think mentioned, my son was an Annapolis graduate. We went to Annapolis when he was what, 6?
2nd grade.
2nd grade, so he'd be 6 or 7. And we walked in, and we're walking around, and he looked at it and said, I'm going to go here. And he did. He geared his whole lifespan to becoming an Annapolis graduate, and he did it. He was deputy brigade commander when he was in. That's the 2nd highest rank you can have as a midshipman. He rose to the rank of captain. My other son decided he wanted to fly, and as my mother said, what's the matter with my grandchildren? One wants to fly in aeroplanes and the other one wants to go in submarines. Doesn't anyone want to be on dry land? None of them wanted to be a mud marine or an infantryman. But both boys followed in the service and loved it. And I guess I had a hand in bringing them to that realization that that's what they wanted to do. Because I was very proud of my service time. I didn't do anything outstanding. I didn't do anything that deserved any medals or anything like that. But it was one of the most interesting periods of time in a man's life, is the time you're in the military. I wouldn't want to go through it again. Right now, in my physical condition, I couldn't. But it was well worth going through as a young man. And if I had my druthers, I would have universal draft today, where every man in the United States would serve in the military for at least a period of a year or two, because I think it makes you a better person.
Well, you're talking about now, so let me ask you, you said you had lived close to this gentleman and you hadn't even known it. Do you have contact with anybody today?
Where?
Do you have any contact
Military?
with men that you served with?
No.
No.
I have lost contact with them. I have, I get like American Legion magazine where they have reunions and that, and I've thought very often it would be very interesting to have a reunion, not of the men of the ship, but the guys at Bikini Atoll, the men who were in Tsingtao, the men who were in Guam when that tidal wave swept onto it. Those were very, very tense moments in our lives. And it would be interesting to see where some of them gone. I would assume that a lot of the men who I served with are gone. We're getting to the age now where, hey, at almost 80, I guess, I'm considered a senior citizen. And that's, I don't know what else to say.
Really appreciate you sharing your story.
It
I
was
think you've done a lot.
It was an interesting time of life. As I say, I'm very proud to have served.
I can see that.
I didn't do anything outstanding, so I don't deserve any accolades.
Well,
The ones who do are dead.
I think you do, but I appreciate you sharing your story. It was a very touching story.
I only got one more thing to say.
Please.
We once carried back a Medal of Honor winner. That means that the coffin is flag draped and a guard stands over it all the way back. They are the people who deserve everything. The ones who didn't come back. Not us. We're lucky they weren't. And it is a matter of luck whether you lived or died. And some of us were very lucky. I've had many, many years after that. And some of our best never made it. That's it.